rebellion to the house of Jacob their sins. Now, this is directing Isaiah to really, really let the people know what is going on with them and what their sins are. So, what did you hear in this?
Not much good.
Not much good. Right. In what way? There's not much good, but in what way?
Not much good going on.
Yeah.
They named the things that tend to show righteousness, but they weren't.
Right. Right. So in essence, they were talking the talk. They weren't walking the walk. So when it says that you seek righteousness every day, day after day they seek me and delight to know my ways. So they go to the temple every day. I mean, it's a show. They go to the temple every day. But then when they leave the temple, they don't do anything. Yeah. They fast, right. Yeah, but they're not doing anything. And it goes on to say in verse 3, why do you fast? It says, I like that. Why do you fast? Why humble yourself? Look, you serve your own interest on the fast day and what? Oppress all your workers. Right. So basically, God recognizes, yeah, you go ahead and fast. That is a spiritual thing to do. But you're not spiritual people. That's basically what he's saying. You're doing it, but you're not spiritual people.
It's called going through the motions.
You betcha. You betcha. It's going
Like
through the
going to
motions.
church on Sunday. Now I go to church on Sunday and then I'm done.
Right, right. And there is often the question of, are you the same Christian on Monday through Saturday that you believe yourself to be on? Did you notice that? Yeah. That you believe yourself to be on Sunday. Right, right. And then I always think, so this is the same for them as it would be for us even. What's your motivation for doing the things that you're doing? I mean, what's your motivation for fasting? Is it so that other people see what you're doing and say, oh, look how they're very spiritual people? I mean, if that's your motivation, you're kind of off. Gordon?
Verse 4.
Yes.
Really caught me. It says, look, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to strike with a wicked fist. What motivation in fasting brings that on?
Yeah.
What's the
They're hungry. They're hangry. They're hangry.
I was going to ask, is there a broader definition of fasting than what you normally think of?
No, fasting for them would be the same for us. For them it would be not eating for a certain amount of time. We talk now about fasting, and fasting is one of the things you can do to fast is to not eat. But we also talk about fasting can be giving anything up that is consuming your time or taking your mind away from God and others. So in essence, for them though, it was about fasting from food. Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Yes, Mio.
So that time fast is kind of David's fasting.
A day of fasting. It could be a day of fasting. Sometimes they fasted.
David had a.
Oh, David. Oh, yeah, David would have fasted too. Yes.
So
Because
not totally fast, right?
right, because for them, even through David's, even back all the way back to Abraham, there would have been days of fasting. Because fasting is thought to be the time where you give up everything so that you can concentrate solely on God and your relationship with God. So yes, David would have fasted. And would have been, now David would have been counted righteous for his fasting, because when David did something wrong, what did he do?
Ask for forgiveness.
He always asked for forgiveness. He always went back to God and said, oh man, I really screwed that one up. And he recognized what he did. What are these people doing?
It's
Rachel.
kind of like us.
Oh, okay. How? Say how?
You know, we go to church, we pray, and still we have the hungry, the homeless, the starving, you know, people in need of clothing, shoes, I mean, everything all around us. And you know, we still can never do enough.
Right, right. As long as we do. You see, God is not telling the people here that they have to do everything. I think that's where we can get, and here's, it's a paralysis analysis. Is that you analyze the world's needs, and they are so great that you know you can't accomplish them, so we do nothing. If I can't do for the world what the world needs, then I can't do. And what's God saying? God doesn't say, Rachel, you have to do everything, right? God says, as a community, as people of God, as children of God, everybody has to do their part.
Yeah.
And when everybody does their part, that's when there's true righteousness happening.
But we're still,
Oh gosh,
we
we still.
still fall so short.
Right. Well, if you heard my sermon on Sunday, again, spell sin. S-I-N. What's in the middle of sin? I'm in the middle of sin. So Rachel, to your point, we always go back to selfishness. Always. So if we are, you know, for some reason, so I'm going to go to them. All right, I'm going to go to them. For some reason, their relationship with God, their relationship with ritual, hear me right, they have a relationship with ritual, and their relationship with ritual is good, but they don't have a good relationship with God. And it's demonstrated because when they leave, they don't change. And so that's a piece where I think that even though we sin and maybe, and don't do perhaps what we should be doing, we at least try. I would say every one of us in here has done.
Oh, yeah.
All of us have done. Now, does that mean that there aren't days that we're self-centered and don't do? You betcha there are. You betcha there are. But I think that we also turn back to God and say, I'm sorry, you know, here's what I will do. Right. So it is, if we were, I'm not going to point any fingers at anybody, but we've got people who are addicted to ritual and not to relationship. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think that's what God is talking about here. You do your rituals. And the rituals, he's not saying the rituals are bad, is he? God's not saying the rituals are bad. What's the intent of ritual?
For us,
For us to what?
oh, it kind of soothes us and makes us think we're doing well.
Right, but to worship? Why do we worship? Worship is a ritual. Why do we worship?
Close to God.
Because it is to get a closer relationship with God. So God is not saying that the rituals are bad. God is saying the way we use the ritual is what's wrong. Now, this, I find great peace in this. Because I'll tell you right now, my feet hit the floor in the morning and I've started sinning right then. And I know it. But you know what I find peace in?
But you can still get up in the morning.
I can still get up in the morning, that's right. Yeah, I don't always find peace in that, I'll tell you. But I find peace in the fact that I am forgiven. The thing is, I recognize my sinfulness. Like David recognized his sinfulness and would always turn back to God. I recognize my sinfulness. Doesn't mean that I don't continue to sin, but I recognize my sinfulness and I give thanks to God for the forgiveness that God gives me. Yeah. The problem here is they're not recognizing their sinfulness. It's all an act. Mm-hmm. It's all an act.
They know something's wrong, though.
Yes! Yes, they do. Well, and they're just back from exile. Why were they put in exile?
Didn't listen.
They didn't listen. They were put in exile for the exact reason that God is saying to Isaiah, you need to talk to these people. They're going down the exact same path they were going down when they went into exile. Maybe the exile is fresh enough that they'll change their ways. Because what happens when they change their ways? I mean, it's in here. What happens when they change their ways?
Then the Lord blesses them.
Absolutely. Then the Lord blesses them. Look at verse 11. Oh, and in fact, I'm going to go to verse 9b. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then what? Your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom will be like the noonday. What does that mean? What's noonday?
Light.
Light. Sunlight. Your gloom will be like the sunlight. And here again, I don't know about you, but I'd sure like a noonday in these dark winters
I'm
that
just
we
gonna
go
say,
through.
not in Ohio.
Not in Ohio, exactly. But I read that and I think, oh God, there's hope. There's hope that there will be that bright light that gives us that light. It gives us hope. And it goes, the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong and you shall be well. Look at the promise that's there, the blessing, the hope that's there, right? And all they have to do is recognize their sinfulness and change.
Yes, because when you ask God for forgiveness, and you finally feel it, you feel peaceful
Yeah.
that you never had before.
Yeah.
And you feel a joy of being a part of God's world.
Uh-huh.
And looking out and seeing, the snow glistening, even though it's cold and you don't want to go out in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to look at it and say, it's clean, it just cleans the earth.
Right.
I mean, when you look out on
Right.
snow.
There's a sense of hope and a sense of peace.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Rachel just said something very important. When you recognize your forgiveness, God forgives us. Who has a hard time forgiving us?
Ourselves.
Ourselves. We do, right. God can forgive us. The other person, if there's another person involved, can forgive us. We just have a hard time forgiving ourselves. Absolutely.
And we keep remembering
We
it.
keep remembering. I wish I had this story because it's the perfect story, but it's one that we tell in Kairos in prison ministry about forgiveness. And I may have paraphrased it in here. Anyhow, this farmer has a car, and it's a race car, a speed car, fancy, and his son, yeah, what's that?
GTO.
A GTO, that's right. I did a funeral not long ago where the woman had a Camaro, red Camaro with lightning stripes down the side. Man, and she was the deceased. But anyhow, that was a nice car. So it was like that. So anyhow, the son asked, Dad, can I take your car out? And so the son's out driving the car. Now the dad raises these award-winning chickens. He's award-winning chickens. They're just, And so he was tending to the chickens that day. And he happened to be sitting on the porch and in the evening when the son comes home. Now, this car is a car. And the son is speeding and racing. And is the story becoming familiar? The son is racing home in this car because it's just like, this is perfect. And boom, the son hits the most prized chicken and kills it. And the son goes to the dad and says, I am so sorry. I just all over the place asking for forgiveness. And the dad says, I forgive you. Now just take the chicken, please, and go bury the chicken. So the next day, the son is just thinking about all the, he just feels awful. So the son goes and digs up the chicken and comes back to the father and says, I am so sorry that I killed this chicken. And the father says, I forgive you. Now go bury the chicken. And so he goes and buries the chicken again. Now this goes on for days. He keeps going and digging up the chicken, and the father finally gets angry and says, look, I forgave you. Now go bury the chicken and forgive yourself. Because the father had already done it. And so that it's such a powerful piece in, especially in prison, when there are people who don't think they can ever be forgiven for anything. It is, God forgives you. Don't keep digging up that chicken. Yeah, and we do, don't we? Because we can't forgive ourselves. We keep digging up that chicken. Yeah.
We do, we beat ourselves.
We beat ourselves up. You betcha. You betcha.
I like that story too, because there is that little bit of element of like, okay, clean up the mess you've made a little bit. You don't have to, do something to atone for it, but it's not completely just a free pass. Go about your day. Start driving your sports car through the farm again. But at the same time, it's make peace with it and move on.
Take responsibility for what you did. Handle it. Forgive yourself and move on. That's great, Matthew. That is great. Yes, Gordon?
There's nothing in here that says they responded to this.
Right. Right.
No response at all.
Right.
So Isaiah's word fell on deaf lips.
Yes.
Deaf ears.
Yes. Which it had before. I mean, this is not anything new. We're getting toward the end. This is 3rd Isaiah. We're getting toward the end of Isaiah. And here God is saying the same thing that God was saying in the beginning of Isaiah. Right. Yeah.
What good did them spending all that time in Babylon do? I mean,
Marcia, that is such a good question. And if they were here, we might ask them that question.
I would like to ask that question of God.
Yeah.
Okay, you let them out of Babylon, but they hadn't learned their lesson.
Right. Yes.
What-
And I don't know. I think in the immediate time after exile, they were good. I think it affected them then. But I've said this before. What happens when there's an event and you get farther and farther away from the event?
Memory gets worse and worse.
And they were just starting to go back to the ways they had before. That was exactly what it was. Paul?
I remember reading sometime about how archaeologists would do digs in the area where these people lived. And they dig down further and further, and they get older and older levels of soil. And they found that when they dug down to the oldest levels of soil, there were more of these graven image idols that the people had in their homes and in their marketplaces and so on. And after a couple of exiles, they didn't find as many of these idols per home, so that they became a little more focused on sticking with their own religion. And that might, so the archaeologists would say, yay, maybe that's one of the outcomes of all this trouble.
Yes. I do believe that when they initially come back from exile, they do good. But they just...
I don't believe they tried to figure out why they were in exile.
Oh, right. Well, I don't think they owned
No.
why they were in
They didn't
exile.
own this for
Right.
their own behavior,
Right,
if there's such a thing.
Right.
Sometimes things happen to people that's not relevant to their behavior.
right. Well, let's be real.
It's
It,
not always a reaction to behavior.
it wasn't God so God led them in the wilderness for 40 years. How do we know it was God? There was a cloud by day and fire by night. Right. So God was there leading them, right? This wasn't God who took them into exile. It was people that God used that took them into exile. So they were taken into exile by the Assyrian king. They were taken into exile by the Babylonian king. And so they could easily not come to understand that it was God using the Assyrian king and God using the Babylonian king to put them in a place where they would think about their relationship with God, it was easy for them to blame the Assyrians and to blame the Babylonians. And as Gordon said, to never own for themselves that they were the reason that they went into exile, right?
Now, here we see reasons because of their behavior,
Right,
okay? There is also times when it's foretold that the Babylonians and the Assyrians are going to do what they do.
oh yeah,
They say that's
Oh, yeah.
going to come upon them.
right,
And they did nothing to prevent that from occurring.
right,
Nothing in relationship to God.
right,
They tried to do it better in terms of military preparation, which was useless
yes,
for their overcoming. So it's still a relationship of God allowing the Assyrians and the Babylonians to do what they did, only because they did not listen to him to prepare for what they were doing.
right. They didn't trust in God,
So it's the same thing here.
right,
They-
Right.
They did telling them how to prepare for this, and they don't do it.
right, right. They
So
don't
it's a
change.
warning.
Well, and that's
and a
why,
conclusion.
that's why being a prophet, you know, nobody would sign up for it.
Sure.
How is it if you go out and tell this whole bunch of people, you know, that this is what you're doing, but you need to be doing these things, and nobody pays any attention to you? I mean, what kind of job rating do you have? Not a very good one, right? And that's why, okay, forgive me, Jonah. Wasn't it no, who walked, it was Jonah, wasn't it, that walked into the town and midway into the town and he said, change your ways. I mean, it was this deadpan, change your ways and God will blah, blah, blah. And everybody in the town changed their ways. And then Jonah was mad
Yeah.
because people listened. Right, right. Yeah. So, but they're not listening here, right? They're headstrong. I mean, let's be real, they're headstrong.
I think it's a case, first of all, James hit the nail on the head. He said, be doers of the word,
Mhm.
not hearers only.
Not hearers only.
They were going through the motions, and I think somebody said, they didn't really figure out why they had gone into, been put in, God had sent them off to exile. Maybe in their heads they understood, but not in their hearts. And they weren't willing to make the changes that God demanded. If you really want to follow, it's going to cost you.
Right.
And, you know, last Sunday's gospel lesson, the Beatitudes, we skip over those because we've heard them so many times. But the last two talk about, blessed are those who suffer for my name.
Right.
You'll
Right.
be persecuted. And we sure as heck don't want to be persecuted.
Right.
And the minute we start living the way God really wants us to live, relatives and friends are saying, wait a minute, back off. You know, a little bit of religion's a good thing, but don't take it too far.
Right. Right.
Somewhere in the lives of these people, there had to be voices that said, do you remember
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
when so-and-so said this?
Absolutely.
Do you remember when you talked about the Assyrians and the Babylonians? Do you remember when that occurred? And it's happened.
Mm-hmm.
We're living in it. There must have been some recollection of
Well,
that
yeah.
whole process.
Well, and let's remember, this is still an oral tradition
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah.
So yes, they would have people telling these stories over and over and over again. And then what would happen with the stories? The punishment that God would rain on them, which was the exiles.
It's no different than the cycle of today,
Right,
in the sense that when people happens to them, certain things occur, or when people do bad,
right.
they say, oh yeah, I remember.
Yes, yes. Well, and that's why, and I like that you use the word cycle. That's why a lot of times you hear counselors telling people you need to break the cycle. We're all kind of in this cycle. So with families, we're in this cycle. We are in a cycle with society, culture puts us in a cycle. And so it is, and that's what's here. They're in a cycle. And God says, break the cycle. You know, don't keep doing this because I know what it's going to be. You're going to be following me, it's all going to be good. Then you're going to sin. Then there's going to be judgment. Then you're going to ask for forgiveness. And then we're going to come back and you're going to be good. And then you're going to sin. And then there's judgment. And then there's, and what God has to say over and over and over again is break the cycle. And they don't. They don't break the cycle, right?
I think the beauty of it is God keeps doing that.
Right, right. You can go all through the Old Testament and that cycle is there. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, they never break the cycle.
He does.
But hopefully, who broke the cycle? Jesus. Hopefully Jesus broke the cycle. Now we know that we're still in a cycle. We tend to be doing the same exact things that they're doing. But Jesus hopefully broke the cycle. Right, right. So, yeah, Paul.
One of the things I like about the Old Testament readings is that in many cases, they were written to people who were in a situation somewhat like we are, in that we are not an occupied country.
Yes.
And so I guess that means that we have more responsibility to make sure there's justice than if we were an occupied country. Then you have very little control of, well, you have some control of
Right.
justice, but a lot less.
Right, but a lot less.
Yeah.
But it does say in here, in an occupied country, if you are being oppressed, do not oppress those under you.
Oh.
Yes, and
You
see,
can still
that's
do that.
yes,
Yeah.
see, you can be in an oppressed country and still do justice. And they weren't even doing that, because it says, you own Israel and you oppress all your workers. And so, here's God saying too, you know, don't oppress your workers.
Yeah.
Even if this country, even if this nation is oppressing you, you have control over this justice that you do. Don't oppress those who work for you. Right.
It's living in a society where you find very few barriers that prevent you from being just. There are some societies that there are rules that prevent you from being just.
Yeah.
When you look at our society, at what times in our history was there things that prevented us from being just? And we will find that the preventions for being just was sometimes within ourselves, within our own people. That's why slavery took such a long time, because there were a lot of people who didn't see injustice in
Right.
slavery.
Right.
So it's the view of justice within a society that's overwhelming and prevents the society frequently from being uniform.
Right.
But we're living in a society where we have all kinds of levels of being just.
Mm-hmm.
Tremendous.
All kinds of levels.
Very few barriers, except for those that we, in our own human nature,
Right.
prevent
Right.
injustice.
Right.
And that's what we fight right now, really.
Right.
We're fighting with our own nature. How do we fight injustice
Right.
where we think there is injustice
Yeah.
from people who don't think it is injustice?
Right. I'm going to go back to what Rick said about, and with the Beatitudes, blessed are you for if you're persecuted for my sake. And yes, we have a lot of layers of injustice that we can work on.
Yeah.
Until it affects me.
Yeah.
Until I have to give something up or I have to suffer. And that's where we start looking at it and go, I'm not ready to suffer that. I like what I have. I like it. Da, 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 da. Right. So there are many layers. We have to ask ourselves, how far are we willing to go
What level
for justice?
What level do we go
Right.
to prevent injustice?
Right.
Or are we satisfied with doing the little injustices?
Right. Right.
Opposed little injustices
Right.
around us.
How far
I
are
don't
we
like to
willing
use
to
the word
go?
beneath us, it's around us.
Yes, around us. I like that, around us.
And I But anyway, that's the struggle we have, that's the human nature struggle.
Exactly. That's why we do corporate confession on Sunday mornings, because it is the nature
Yeah.
of human beings.
There's-
Someday I hope to buy a little less from Amazon.
Yes,
Locally.
yes. Yeah, not have to hang my head and go out in the dead of night to pick up my packages.
It's insane though when you fight the growing initiation of Amazon with service,
Yeah,
and it still is. I had something here today I really needed. I got it within 12 hours,
yeah, yep.
on my doorstep,
Mhm.
free postage.
Yeah.
That's a level of service that is destructive
Mhm.
as well as supportive of
Right.
the individual.
Well, we don't have to wait.
Yeah. Well, it's the ease.
It's the don't wait attitude.
I didn't have to use gas.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't have to leave my house to go get it, right? I didn't have to meet people face to face and smile at them. I could keep my pajamas on and order, yeah,
It's an organization that intends to make us feel good about ourselves,
yeah,
when we're really not very good about the environment around us.
Yeah.
But we feel good about it.
yeah. Matt?
Well, I was gonna say, like on that same day service point, I've heard about, if you're gonna wait a week, to get a package, then they would deliver all the packages on your street on the same day.
Yes,
But when they come and deliver it 12 hours later, they might come to your house, and then your neighbor orders something tomorrow, and they come to your neighbor's house, and you're creating this extra zigzag, and it's highly inefficient for
right,
the gasoline usage and the number of cars on the road and the workforce and all that. So there's definitely a cost, that slight bit of convenience of, I can get it at a snap of a finger, is creating a huge inefficiency in that, they might visit the same street several times in a week as opposed to once a week because, everyone ordered on different days.
nonetheless, they dangle that temptation out
They
there.
do, and-
You can get it in 12 hours if you want it, yeah.
But I went to the store to get something and they didn't have
I
it.
know it, I
So
know
I go
it,
home and order it and it's there the
I
next
know
morning.
it, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
True.
that's absolutely true, yeah. And
That
if
used
it's
to-
something you need,
Mhm.
yeah. Marcia?
I'm reading a historical thing of George Washington called His Excellency. It's a whole big book and it's really good. But the same issues politically and
Yeah.
that we're going through at the time of George Washington
Yeah,
are the exact same things we're
Yeah.
dealing with today. The fact of this one undermining this one by saying this and this one, I mean, you think, oh my gosh, we haven't, in 200 years, 300 years, we haven't risen above all that
right,
stuff.
which takes us
To
into
this.
Corinth.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, I guess the only thing that's hopeful in that is that means sort of the end is not near either, right? That we're not improving, but also we've survived this before, so we can survive it again. So,
Yeah, good take on it, Matthew. All right, so Corinth. These are people who really are not much different than the Israelites. They value dropping names. So if you remember, we read from Corinthians before, and Paul said, you say I'm a part of this person because they baptized me, or you say I'm a part of this person because they baptized me. And Paul says it's not the leader who baptized you, it's God who baptized you. So the Corinthians have this problem of they want to be in a hierarchy, and they're fighting to find out who's going to be on top. That's it. They really are. They're in this hierarchy, and Paul is trying to tell them this is not what Jesus wanted. This is not what God came to or Jesus came to create. So, would someone read 1 Corinthians for us?
I'll take a shot at it.
Thank you.
I love the way he starts.
Yes.
He says, when I came to you, brothers and sisters, I did not come proclaiming the mystery of God to you in lofty words or wisdom. For I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. I came to you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. My speech and my proclamation were not with plausible words of wisdom, but with the demonstration of the Spirit and of the power, so that your faith might rest not on human wisdom, but on the power of God. Yet, among the mature, we do not speak wisdom. So it is not wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are doomed to perish. But we speak God's wisdom, secret and hidden, which God decreed before the ages for our glory. None of the rulers of this age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, what no eye has seen or ear heard, no human heart conceived, what God has prepared for those who love Him. These things God has revealed to us through the Spirit, for the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. For what human being knows what is truly human, except the human spirit that is within? So also no one comprehends what is truly God, except the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit that's from God, so that we may understand and the gifts bestowed on us by God. And when we speak of these things in words, not taught by human wisdom, but taught by the Spirit, interpreting spiritual things to those who are spiritual. Those who are unspiritual do not receive the gifts of God's Spirit, for they are foolishness to them, and they are unable to understand them, because they are spiritually discerned. Those who are spiritual discern all things, and they are themselves subject to no one else's scrutiny. For who has known the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ.
I love this part back here. Verse 2, for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And then even before that, I did not come proclaiming the mystery of God to you in lofty words or wisdom. And then, I came to you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling.
I love the way he switches from I to we.
Yeah,
It's a good technique. He's a great writer.
absolutely.
A great message man.
Because here he is, I'm going to tell you my story, and then I'm going to bring you into my story and include you in my
You are
story.
now me,
Right.
in a sense.
Why does Paul say that I didn't come and speak to you with lofty words and with wisdom?
Because he wanted them to realize that he had changed.
He wanted them to realize he had changed, right?
And
these were Gentiles. Let's remember
Yeah.
that. These are Gentiles.
and he was coming as a Roman to them.
Right, right. So why did he not speak to them with lofty words and words of
They
wisdom
wouldn't
and
have
theology?
understood him.
Oh, that's exactly it. That's exactly it.
They wouldn't have
Paul-
understood him.
Right. It's really not any different than if you're teaching first grade, you don't use sixth grade tactics to teach first graders. You have to use a different language. And that's what Paul is getting at here. I came to you, you all were immature in the spirit when I came to you. And I spoke to you with the language that you would understand. I didn't come to you with lofty words of wisdom. I didn't share words of theology with you. I didn't tell you we're going to talk about hermeneutics today because you wouldn't have understood. And if people don't understand, what eventually happens?
They ignore
They ignore, yes, and they become disinterested. I don't understand this. I'm never going to understand this. I'm going to just leave.
Sounds
Right?
like my computer class.
Exactly. I got to tell
I
you,
don't get this.
several of my classes, I will never forget this at all. I don't know if any of you knew Walter Bowman, but Walter Bowman was such a special man, such a special man. And what class was it that I was in? I don't even remember anymore. But it used all the big words, all the big words. And so he's talking to, and I'm not a big word person. I mean, I'll be honest with, right up front with you. I'm not a big word person. So he was talking to another person in the class. And they're talking all these, I mean, it was like, and I'm sitting there, and Dr. Bowman looks at me and he goes, "You don't understand what we're talking about, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "And you're gonna walk out this door and go leave seminary, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." Honestly, I'm sitting there, he read my mind, because it was, if this is what I'm supposed to understand, and I don't know that I ever will. Because to be honest with you, that wasn't a language I wanted to speak. I wanted to speak Jesus Christ. I wanted to speak God loves you, we love others. That was the language I didn't want to speak these big, long, 20-letter words, because, and I didn't understand them. And Dr. Bowman looked at me and he said, that's why I'm teaching this class. I'm here for everybody. I'm here for the ones who have this language, but I'm also here for the ones who have this language. And he made me feel so good. He goes, you don't have to do this. But you have to know your language. You have to find your speak. You have to own that. And I'm like, okay, I can stay. But honestly, I was on my way down to checking out, not gonna do this, Joe, and then, Joe, let's go.
Go.
I just was gonna say, I'm the same boat. When I have a pastor get up, I don't care what church I'm in,
Sure.
they start spouting all this big words, I'm done.
Mhm.
I speak poor English.
Yeah,
And when I start hearing all these, I don't care what that says, I would just want to talk to me about the Bible.
right. Now, I may be able to drop a big math word on you, but that's, but
Well,
not
if it gets past
theology.
2 and 2, plus
Yeah.
equal 4, forget it.
Gordon and then Rick.
I think you look at Paul here, he's starting out with an entry which is very, I'm very simple. I'm very straightforward. And yet he tackles one of the toughest words in religion, spirituality.
Yes.
Oh,
And
Yes.
he comes out and he talks about spirituality just like you should all know spirituality.
Yeah.
And they know diddly.
Right.
As I read through that,
Yeah.
I wondered
They
about
will
that.
do.
Yes.
And who understood what he was saying?
It's really an approach like probably that professor did. I don't
Yeah.
know. You approach the subject, and then you say, it's gonna be very simple, and you start listening to it, and you say, oh, the hell, I don't understand the word.
Right, right. Well, and he
this
said,
is it.
yeah,
And I think that's exactly what's happening here with Paul, if we're not careful.
absolutely,
Yeah. And trying
absolutely.
to figure out
yeah.
from the very beginning, what is spiritual about Jesus Christ?
Yes, yes,
That's what he has to convince us, talk
Right.
to us about, and that's what he's trying to do. And I don't know whether he does a very good job, he'll do it later on, in many,
Right.
many ways.
I think he has to unpack things as he goes along, but he also said the gifts of the Spirit.
Yeah.
And I'm here, same thing, I'm sitting here going, wait a minute, that should be about lesson 6 or 7. You jumped ahead a little bit too fast. And you know how they don't understand the gifts of the Spirit. They don't understand the gifts of the Spirit because they don't understand the Spirit yet. So I agree.
Yeah,
I think
love
he
this.
jumped ahead too far, but I also believe that he is trying to speak in a language they understand. Yeah, Rick?
A good friend of mine I worked with once, a guy by the name of Tex Sample,
Oh, yeah.
they wrote a really interesting book called The Gospel According to Minnie Pearl. The oral tradition, and he tells a story. He was a professor at the Methodist Seminary in Kansas City, and one of his students graduated and was a white student assigned to an all-black church in rural Alabama or somewhere. And so, he went down, met some of the people, and the first Sunday rolled around when he's supposed to preach. And he gets up, he puts this sermon together in which he tells the people everything he learned in seminary about Jesus Christ. And he's quoting all these authors and things he'd read and studied and so forth. the service is over, and he thought to himself when he sat down, well, that went pretty well, I think that would go. Well, on the way out, this little old gray-haired black woman tugged on his robe, and she said to him, Reverend Jones, I'm not interested in what other people say about Jesus. What do you say about him?
Mhm.
And that's what Paul was.
Yeah, yeah,
He doesn't care what other people say.
Right.
He's trying to say, the only thing I want to talk to you about is this guy called Jesus Christ. And I'm not going to use fancy language. I'm just going to get down and dirty with you.
yeah,
And
yeah.
we're going to address the problems
Yeah.
and so forth.
You know, at my first call, I learned several lessons at my first call that were not out of books, they were life lessons. So every Memorial Day, the street was closed and there was a big festival and blah, blah, blah. And this was a farming community. And so they always had a kiddie tractor pull. Do you know what a kiddie tractor pull is? You ride these little kiddie tractors and they put weights on the back and you try to go the distance, so to speak. So there's a length of, and you try to pedal this weight to the distance, right? Well, there happened to be an 18 and, everybody wants to hear this story. There happened to be an 18 and older category. Well, people from the church they were coming up and I'll get in it if you get in it. I'm like, I'm not gonna, this is a pedal, this is a tractor with weights on it. I'm not, and they kept doing it. I'm like, okay, God, I don't know why you want me to do this thing, but so I signed up for it. Got third place. All right, got third place, red ribbon. The next Sunday was, no. The next year at Pentecost, I wore my red ribbon, because it was like I needed to wear red, and so red ribbon. But anyhow, after the race, it was like I had gained a new respect from them, and I emailed one of my professors and said, because he was really about what do you do in the parish and blah, 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 blah. So I told him this story and what I did and all this kind of stuff. And he goes, sounds like you were speaking their language. And then I'm like, oh, we don't even have to use words. I was willing to do what they do. And they were more willing to hear what I had to say. And that was an incredible lesson to learn, because we do go in sometimes and we go, well, I just graduated from seminary and I know. So I'm going to bring wisdom to you. Yeah, and it was, I never was that way. But a tractor pull was really all it took to become a part of who they are.
You put yourself on their level.
I put myself on their level. Yeah. Oh, I'll tell you. So, okay. I always thought I should have written a book about my first call. So I'm in this little town of Paris. There's about 100 or 150 people who live in Paris proper. And there are farm animals in this town, all right? So about 3 houses down, the family there have horses. And so one day I come and I pull in front of the church. I was just on hospital visits, pull in front of the church, and I'm looking in my backyard and going, I wonder why there's a horse in my backyard. You don't say that every day, right? So I get out and I walk over to the backyard and I'm like, I just kind of went in the backyard and hesitated a little bit because, I don't know him, he doesn't know me. I wasn't going to test him. So pretty soon, so then I was even stupid enough to go to try to, oh, nice horsey, how close can I get? And of course, I'm scared to death. Anyhow, the owner comes walking down the alley and she's carrying her little girl with her. And, I'm there going, oh, that's one thing. So she comes up and she tries to get the horse. Well, she can't because she's holding the little girl, right? And I said, you know what? Let me hold your little girl and you get the horse. And so then I wrote this professor again and I said, you know what I learned? Sometimes it's good for us to step back and let other people lead. He goes, you're speaking their language. And, you know, and that's what Paul is trying to do. I think that's what Paul is trying to say to us. Speak the language of the people where you are, and they'll listen more to you about what you want to say about Jesus Christ. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, all right. Shall we go on to Matthew? Matthew, we are in what we call the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount starts with the Beatitudes and talks about the Beatitudes, and then goes into this. A lot of times the Sermon on the Mount, the Sermon on the Mount has a lot of Jesus sayings in it. So it's not necessarily a story that sounds like it makes sense, but it's a lot of little sayings in it that we can unpack. So if someone would read this, please.
Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until it all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven."
This reminds me of that first lesson, where people were doing the religious things right, but something was wrong.
Exactly. All the religious things are right, but there was something missing. Yeah. What is, and that is critical there in verse 13. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, well, truth of the matter is, when does salt lose its taste?
It doesn't.
It doesn't.
Not used for a long time.
Right. Well, even if it's not used for a long time, salt still retains its taste. Right.
But saltiness means that you need to be down to earth with what you're doing.
Right.
Be with the people.
Mm-hmm.
If you are the salt of the earth, it means that others will respect you because you are with them.
Yeah. And it does mean that. Absolutely. But a person can lose their saltiness. A person can, now, even salt.
If you don't use it.
Yeah. And a part of this, what Jewish people would have understood, you are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, for them, they would have understood that salt can become unclean. Even though it hasn't lost its taste, it's lost its metaphorical taste. And so what happens when their salt is unclean?
When they're not using it, their palates or whatever, then they're failing.
Right. Absolutely. That's absolutely it. And here it is that if salt has become unclean, what do they have to do with it? Throw it out. They cannot use unclean anything. They can't use unclean salt. So in a sense, and this is what Rachel is going to, if you lose your faith, then you're worth nothing, right? Because what, if we were honest and truthful, faith is everything to us.
Well, and that's when you ask God to bring you back.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because sometimes you feel like, God's way out there, and I'm here, and I'm not feeling it today. And it happens.
It happens.
Everybody.
You bet.
And you say, Lord, bring me back.
Right. And there's
Be
the
focused on you.
and there's the sense of when we turn back to God, we haven't lost our faithfulness. There's where David was. I'm going to go to David again.
Yeah.
We look at David and we go, how can David be called righteous? How can David be called faithful? Because no matter what, he always returned to God. He was always faithful in his relationship to God. Well, and that's what it's talking about here. Salt, in essence, can't ever really lose its taste fully. So if we have faith, we can't lose that faith fully. But there are some who turn their backs on faith, totally, don't want anything to do with it. And so it's a little bit of a harsh statement to say that, but it's also a warning about don't turn your back on your faith. Don't turn your back on your faith, because even if you have faith the size of a
Mustard seed.
you can move mountains, right? And that's what that means.
Because I have seen my own mother turn her back on church,
Yeah. Ah, okay, well, that's a
On
different
her
story.
but not her faith.
Right. Church is a different story, all
Uh-huh.
right? Church is a completely different story, because I can say my dad turned his back on church and rules, but didn't lose his faith. Correct. And we can unpack that another time. Rick?
Somewhere I read that salt served two essential functions in that time. One was as a preservative, and the second was as a seasoning. And if you take that kind of metaphorically, what I think Jesus might be saying is, we need to identify the things in our world, in our culture, that are worth preserving. The good stuff. The leaders who stick their necks out to try to do the right things and so forth. But at the same time, we need to season and flavor our culture with what? God's love. We need to keep reminding people that there is a God, and that God is the God who came into the world and loves us, not judges. God loves us. And that's the message.
Yep. Preach it.
There was an Old Testament lesson a week or so ago about God wanting us, what does the Lord require of you?
Yeah,
To
Malachi.
do justice.
Micah,
love-
Micah 6:8,
Do
Micah 6:8.
justice,
Yeah.
love kindness.
Right.
And walk humbly with your God. Well, kindness kind of implies making, it implies positive emotions. And, if you show love towards someone, and love is involved and kindness is involved, it usually is a positive emotional experience.
Right.
And that law wants it to be both, the person doing it and the person receiving it. Doing justice can often result in unpleasant experiences.
Absolutely. Well, and it's part of what Gordon was saying earlier. There are all kinds of layers to justice. How far are you willing to go? Are you willing to go into the part where you may suffer for it? Yeah. Gordon?
Which comment reminded me of a question would be, what is the salt of Jesus' message?
What's the preservative?
What is it?
What is
What
the,
is- what is-
what's the seasoning? What's the
what is the
preserve, what's both?
seasoning?
Right, what's
What
the
is its
seasoning, what's the preservative?
What is the salt?
Yeah,
I think that's what Matthew's asking us, or Jesus is asking us today. What is my salt?
yeah,
What am I all about?
yeah. And what should you be all about? Mm-hmm,
That's my salt.
mm-hmm.
And once you understand the salt, then the light is natural
Right, right.
for you to show that salt.
Well, right, and then verse 16 is then a critical verse, and I think it stems from what you're talking about. Where do we hear verse 16? Just heard it last Sunday at 10, the Sunday before at 8:30.
Good verse.
In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven.
Baptism.
Baptism, absolutely. And we say that because the point is, you now are God's child. You now are, your light is lit. Make sure that that light shines. But how does our light shine?
It's interesting, when we do good things, do
Yes.
we do it for the glory of God or for ourselves?
Absolutely. And that's where I think we would go back to this first one. What's your motivation for doing the things you do? If you want a pat on the back, then that's your motivation. And Jesus says, you know, people who want things in this world, when they receive them, that's all they're going to get. But if you're working for the kingdom of God, then you're not going to get your reward here. You're going to get your reward later, right? And that's the same kind of thing. What reward are you working for? Right. Rachel?
One of the things that pops into my mind is that when you want to let your light shine, recognize those that you're talking to. Look them in the eye.
Mm.
Recognize their talents and give praise when you can.
Mhm.
I think that's letting your light shine.
Mhm.
I think that's one of the good ways to do it.
Well, and what you're talking about is how do you treat people?
Yes.
And one thing, I don't know if any of you remember Barb Packer.
Oh,
yeah.
very much
Yes.
so.
And Barb was blessed to be in charge of the food pantries for LSS. And Barb is the one who changed it from coming, when they came in, it's just, we're gonna tell you what you get, to choices. Right. So when you come in, we're going to tailor this to your family and what you need. So we're not going to interpret your need. You're going to tell us your need. And it was then like shopping coming into, well, there you're giving that person dignity. But what Barb also said was, and this was people from All Saints who went down to the pantry to work, the thing about people from All Saints that went to the pantry to work is that we treated the people as people. We looked them in the eye. We talked to them. It was kindness. You know, we were kind to them about, you know, who they were and talking to them about their families and what's, you know, and not looking down on them, not looking at them like, oh, well, you're coming to beg from us, which is what the you'll get what we give you attitude is. If you're coming to beg, you'll get what we give you. On the other way around is, no, we see you as people who are, for whatever reason, in this time of life, you are in need. And we want to be here to help you with that. Yeah.
I think that's a really critical point you just
Mhm.
made. And it reminds me of a video clip that we saw last Saturday morning by Rob Bell
Mm-hmm.
on the bullhorn approach to evangelism and how, you know, the guy stands out there with a bullhorn and he's just kind of saying, you're doomed to hell, you're doomed to hell. And the other way to do is to quietly live your faith in a way that people look at you and say, what? Why do they live that way? what makes them tick? I wanna know more about this.
Mhm.
I think that's what Paul was trying to do.
Right,
And I
right.
think that's what you can put a light on, you can get a 75,000 watt,
Yeah, you're not preaching to
Yeah.
them.
No,
No, you're showing them a kindness
yeah,
yeah,
and you remember that they're a real person.
Yeah.
yeah.
I remember the first time somebody came up to me, it really was the first time, that somebody came up to me and said, I want what you have.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, let me talk to you about it, then, what I have. And it wasn't, the saying, I want what you have, was because of how I lived my life. They saw how I lived my life, there was a sense of peace in it, there was, and that's where it was, I want what you have. And then the door's open, it's wide open, and you guys say, let's sit down and have some coffee. Let me tell you my life. The other thing I think is important for us is that when we talk to people and use the language where they are, we also have to tell them our story. You have to own your story, and you have to talk about how does my story intersect with Jesus' story.
Yeah.
And once you can start telling people about your own story, you don't sit down with people and go, well, okay, you want what I have? Well, you have to do this. You have to go to church. You have to do this. You have to do this. Because what's going to happen? They're gone. You want what I want? Then listen to my story. Listen to the person who loves me in spite of me. And that's what you do. And I think once we can use that language and we can speak to people with a language they understand, how we live our lives, that's one language they understand, how we live our lives, and then just simply, here's my story, and here's Jesus' story, and here's how they intersect. Then I think we've got them.
You talk about demonstrating God or whatever. It was an interesting thing when I was grocery shopping. And out in the middle of the aisle, there was an Anthony's
Oh, yeah.
display.
Oh, yeah.
And on the corner, I see crumb cake. But it's just sitting there, on the top of everything else. And I thought, well, that's what I really want that. But I'm gonna go around the other side, and if there's more there, I'm gonna pick one out rather than one lying out here like that. So I
Yes.
went around, and there wasn't anything there. So I came back and I picked it up. And as I picked it up, this little old lady in the shopping cart says, I saw you pick that up, that's crumb cake. I said, yes, I did. I said, I went around and I thought, look, and she said, yeah, I know that. I said, yes, I did. I said, I think that was there just for me. And she said, yes, it was God sent.
Ah!
I said, he's around, but I'm not so sure.
Then he cares that I get crumb cake. Oh, that's funny.
And we both
That's
laughed.
funny. Yes, yes.
What made her do that? I
Yeah.
don't understand that at all.
Watch you, yeah, and watch you do that.
Who's watching me?
Yes. That would be a good sermon.
That's
Who's
crazy. That was
watching
crazy.
you?
But it's just the way I was going to said, well, I went around, all the way around again.
That
Nothing
is
there,
so
I picked it up. She
funny.
said, I saw you.
That
And
is
I'm like,
so
she was
funny.
watching me.
Yes,
When you
yes.
talk fast,
Because
Oh
I
my
reached for it the
gosh.
first time
I
and
say
then I
I'm
let it go.
fast.
Yes.
It's not
And then I
that,
went
it's
around
health
and I came
reasons.
back.
Yes.
I said, I saw you.
Oh my gosh,
Just
Marcia.
a real quick report, that was my son calling.
Oh, good.
He was on his way to the airport. He has the flight at 2:30 that they had changed last night late because he was supposed to come through Dallas. And one of the gals that was in charge of getting him the flight knew that the Dallas was having all kinds of issues and all this. So she rerouted him through Atlanta.
Oh, good,
So he's coming through Atlanta.
good.
He should be home.
Have an easier time at least with the
Oh, yeah.
flights.
11:30
Yeah.
tonight.
Good,
He said he's in some pain, but it's tolerable. so-
good. Joe?
I just have a question. When we do these, do they know what scriptures we're studying
Yes.
today? Okay,
Mhm.
so they know in advance?
Matthew puts it on the screen,
Good.
what we're doing.
Good.
Yep. It's as if they're right here with us
Good.
and reading it along with us. Yep. Yep. And in fact, if they wanted to, they could even interact with us because there's a chat feature. So if they had a thought or a question, nobody's done it yet,
Do they know
they
that?
can.
They do now, we're on the air.
So those of you at home listening, if you watch us live, you can actually chat with us. And if you need to know more about that, call and talk to Matthew, and he will give you all the information you need. Rachel, did you have a thought?
About 2 or 3 Sundays ago, I sat out here in the gathering place and I shared my story. And I had written it down some time back. And a gal from Linworth Church keeps asking me to do the devotional with my story. And I told her, I won't get up in front of people and tell my story. But if they want to know it, I'm more than happy to share how God has been in my life, all of my life, as I look back on it.
Yes, yes. Thank you for saying that too. We don't always see God when we're in the midst of something, but
No, we
we
don't.
often see God when we look back on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when I look back, I can see God's hand on me from the time I was burned at 9 months of age. And it's not a real long story because I've cut out a lot of things, but it's the basics of how God has been in my life, all of my life, through all of the ups and downs and
Yes.
in-betweens.
Yes.
And I just wanted to share that with you, that I think Patty was in that group that heard my story.
Good. You blessed them with your story.
Well, someone asked me about it, and that's when it happened.
Yeah, yeah. All right, well, the bell rang. It's time for the next class.
I have
So
a,
you have 3 minutes to use the bathroom. No, I'm just kidding.
I have a really great question.
Yeah.
How can we find out whether it's okay to park at the big brick building south of this church as an overflow? Is that okay now? I know there was a time when it was okay, and then there was a time when it was not okay.
You mean south of?
Yeah,
South of us.
Right.
And-
Oh, it's okay.
You will answer me across.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Is the barrier out of the driveway? If the
Well,
barrier's
so-
still there.